Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. The Bank of Canada has cut now interest rates 2 times in a row for 2 consecutive months. And what does this actually mean for the Canadian economy, for the housing market, and how is it going to impact different provinces? While interest rate cuts generally bring a lot of optimism in the market, a lot of buyers are expected to jump into the market and we expect prices to shoot to the moon. That's what you hear everybody say. But going through the monetary policy, you will see that there's a lot more to it. And Bank of Canada has started becoming extremely dovish in their reports. And what does that actually mean going forward? And how should you react, whether you're a first-time home buyer, whether you're looking to sell your home, or whether you're an investor? And that's what you're going to look into, because a lot of things are changing in the Canadian economy landscape. And that's what we're going to do a deep dive on. Before we get started, hey guys, it's Iyer, your Calgary realtor, and this is your channel to know everything there is about the Calgary real estate market every single month, what is happening, to help you make a better decision whenever you're looking to buy, sell, or invest. And I'm always open to have discussions. I love data. This is a very data-oriented channel to help you be better informed and make smarter choices, so that you're being proactive in the market and not reactive like everyone else. So as discussed before, we can see the Bank of Canada has cut interest rates 2 months in a row, but not only that, they have actually updated their economy forecast, projecting a slower GDP growth for 2024 than previously anticipated. So why is the Bank of Canada being this dovish in their new monetary policy report when they had their press conference? So going over this article, as you can see, we've had 2 interest rate cuts, so that brings us to 4.5% right now as far as our target rate. But also the market is pricing an additional 50 basis point cut at some point pretty soon. So why does the Bank of Canada need to be that aggressive? What are these economy factors that are the red flags right now? As we can see here, the shelter costs actually was forecasted at 6.2% annualized, and that is down from 6.4% that we calculated in May. So that is good for the inflation part of it. And right over here, you can see that we continue to expect an average inflation rate of 2.6% for 2024 and a 2.4% from 2025. So that's up from our previous forecast of 2.2%. And then the Bank of Canada eventually expects it to reach the target rate of 2% in 2026. Now, I do think even with this readjustment from 2.2% to 2.4%, it's still a little bit optimistic depending on what factors you look at. Right now, there are still a lot of upward pressures that could come around back in the economy and put upward pressure on the inflation. And maybe we might not actually be able to reach these numbers unless you overstimulate the economy, but then at what cost? The Bank of Canada actually revised its economic growth projections to the GDP. So now they are forecasting a real GDP growth of 1.2% for 2024, which is down from the previous 1.5% that we were expecting. That's a significant drop in GDP. And even this 1.2% feels quite optimistic to me. Before picking back up in 2.1% in 2025 and 2.4% in 2026. Now, the 2.4% in 2026, I can see that being achieved, but the 2.1% in 2025, I think, is a little overly optimistic. So, with all these rate cuts that are happening, it brings a lot of optimism in the market. A lot of buyers are expected to come off the sidelines, start jumping into the market, buying properties, therefore pushing prices higher, increase affordability across the market. And that's what basically is the narrative right now. All the realtors will tell you that. But what really is the impact of interest rate cuts, especially cutting interest rates before US does their interest rate cuts? Now, US is seeing a lot stronger GDP growth than Canada. So they are at a much stronger position to actually be able to cut interest rates. So then are we cutting interest rates out of necessity? What exactly does cutting interest rates mean for the economy? As we can see here, because we are cutting interest rates prior to US and we are pumping more money into the economy, that is going to drive down the value of the Canadian dollar against the US. So as we can see here, ever since we started cutting the interest rates over the last month, we've seen a significant drop from 0.73 to almost now 0.722. So this is going to keep putting downward pressure on the Canadian currency against foreign currency. And so while it might seem that you can afford more, but your dollar value has actually dropped in the same amount of time. Right now, the global container cost, so the cost for shipments around the world, is actually on a sharp upward trend. As you can see here, all through 2023, it balanced out after COVID. We know what happened during COVID. We had a lot of issues with containers and shipments, and everything was far more expensive. And now we are seeing that happen again because of a lot of issues around the world. So right over here, you can see around April is when we saw a sharp rise in container costs. So imports, exports, everything will face the impacts of all of these increased costs of freight. But that, together with a weakening dollar, is going to impact our trade, because as we can see over here, Canada exports to US constitutes 75%. And as far as our imports go, it's 48%. So now obviously the drop in Canadian dollar is going to have a significant impact on our imports, because we're going to pay a lot more money for the same amount of goods. And as you can see here, it's not just applicable to US, but also 13% of our imports come from China. So that, together with the freight costs and everything, is going to have an adverse impact on the cost of goods within our economy. So when we import things into the country now, because we have to pay more, all of that cost is going to be carried on to the consumer. So this is potentially going to cause an upward pressure again on inflation. And that is something that most people are not aware of, because when interest rate again gets cut, they are happy. They think they'll have more money to spend, but they don't realize the macro impact on the economy and how Canada's imports, exports are affected by its dollar value. So while saving rates are dropping, wages are not going up, your dollar is losing more value, but also your imports are getting more expensive, and therefore your inflation will now get pushed back up, and your affordability actually doesn't go up, it goes down. So while all of this is happening in the economy, another big factor in the Canadian GDP, apart from real estate of course, is oil. Oil is extremely important, especially for Alberta's economy. So while crude oil prices have been going up since December, and that is good, the natural gas prices have actually been on a decline since May. And what does this mean for the Canadian economy? While overall it will have some impact, but it is especially important in Alberta and Calgary, as we've been extremely sensitive to natural gas prices. And if this continues to go down, we're going to see more unemployment happen, drop in wages, and unfortunately this will have a significant impact on our economy directly in the short term. Speaking of unemployment caused not just by drop in natural gas prices, but overall a big topic right now I see on Facebook groups and WhatsApp chats, and a lot of people talking about it, is that unemployment is on the rise, and not just in Calgary, Alberta, but across Canada overall. So what really is happening is right now we are sitting at an almost 8% unemployment rate in Alberta. This is up from 5.5% just a couple months ago. And year over year, this is a 1.3% change. So we are seeing a 1.3% increase in unemployment compared to the same time last year. How does Alberta compare to all other provinces? Right over here, we can see Alberta, the unemployment rate is of course higher at 7.1%, whereas Canada is at 6.4% overall, and Ontario is actually very, very close to Alberta at 7%. So unemployment in all the major provinces is pretty high. British Columbia is the only one that sees a pretty low unemployment rate right now as a major province compared to other provinces. And then right after that is Quebec at 5.7%. Now, when looking at the unemployment data, something that I found very interesting was the unemployment by age. And this is where we can see obviously where the disparity in the market is. So right over here, you can see that when ages 15 to 24 has actually seen a very sharp rate increase in unemployment, whereas the other age groups are mostly a sideways movement with a slightly upper tick on the 55 years and more. So what does this mean? This actually coincides with a lot of what I've been hearing in the market from all the conversations that I've had. The market is mostly hiring only intermediate or senior positions, managerial roles. It's the interns and the new graduates or people looking for their first jobs that are having the hardest time. So junior roles are the ones that, first of all, there's almost no availability on the job market. There's almost no roles for juniors. And even when there is, there's extreme competition and very low hires. And this coincides perfectly with that. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So in tough times, companies have to tighten their belts. There's not enough financing available. They can't take risks on unknown talent. And so instead, they invest with people of years of experience, size down their teams, and push forward and try to make it out of these tough times. And so that's where we are seeing actually a lot of the drop and increase, actually, I would say, in unemployment. So as far as that's the picture for unemployment, how does employment look? When we look at the employment numbers, the employment numbers actually look pretty positive because they've been on a constant rise since May 2020, where we had a slight sideways movement, I would say, since the start of 2024. It hasn't been ticking up as much. Now, again, if we break down the employment numbers and look a bit more into the data, I would break it down by part-time and full-time jobs to understand how the market's behaving. So as you can see here, full-time employment was actually on a sharp rise since 2019. And that's where we saw a lot of the increases that we did in the previous graph. But ever since, I would say about May or Jan to May this year, we've actually seen more of a sideways movement. And whereas when we look at the part-time jobs in that same time frame are actually seeing an upward trend. So a lot of the employment increases right now are happening in part-time jobs and not full-time jobs. So this coincides with the same story where companies are facing a lot of stress. They're not able to hire like they did before. And so not only are they not hiring new fresh employees, they're hiring more senior positions, but they're also hiring part-time jobs or contract jobs instead of full-time employees because they don't want to take that risk. The finances are just not available to take those risks and project. And so then that will further affect the potential of innovation, GDP growth, and there is just no expansion on the economy. And so all of this comes full circle to understand why the Bank of Canada is now suddenly so dovish and increasing interest rates and trying to pump money into the economy because they are trying to kick the can down the road. And this is just how a lot of economies function right now. Even US does this, where they keep avoiding recessions. But recessions, most people don't understand, are helpful, are good for the economy. You need it from time to time because it helps cleanse the economy. It helps get rid of companies that are not being as productive or innovating or contributing to the economy. Unfortunately, that does mean a lot of job losses. But in an economy like Canada, where fundamentally the industries are extremely weak, haven't innovated for a long time, just kicking the can down the road is not the best solution because at some point it's going to catch up with us. But that's what Bank of Canada is doing right now because they have to ease those pressures with it being an election year. You can't have turmoil in the markets. And so right now, with pumping money into the economy, they are hoping a lot of the small caps, mid caps will be able to survive and then bring about more job hiring, show job growth, and then paint a beautiful picture by election time, and then just hope the issue doesn't come back next year or the year after, and at some point it will catch up with us though. So to further emphasize this weakness in the economy, apart from the unemployment, the lack of wage growth, the hiring only of part-time jobs, the uptick of inflation, things getting more and more expensive, savings rates are going down. But what can we use to then say that there's obviously weakness in the economy? And that all comes down to retail sales. So retail sales basically paints a picture of the amount of money, excess money that people have to spend, the times people go out to restaurants, purchase goods for their family, take vacations, any kind of spending in the economy. So as you can see here, we are projected to have a drop of 0.3% now in June, followed by the huge 0.8 percent plunge that we had in May, the sharpest we've seen in 14 months. And it's not a coincidence that this is exactly at the same time that we saw the interest rate cuts happen, because the Bank of Canada was able to see that there's a huge weakness in the economy and people are not contributing. And so when you see a drop in retail sales, that has a direct impact on the GDP growth. And that's why we're seeing GDP also drop. Because if people don't spend money, so right now we can see here, we've seen a minus 2.7% for building material and garden equipment. Food and beverage saw a minus 1.9%. Clothing and accessory retailers minus 1.5%. Core retail sales, which exclude essentially business and gas station and fuel vendors, plunged 1.4%. So from the previous year, retail turnover edged higher by 1%. So obviously there's a lot of weakness in the economy. And this is the big reason that we are not suddenly seeing a huge surge of buyers just suddenly come off the sidelines. Because people no longer have those wads of cash. People can't just come into the economy and stop buying houses because interest rate drops. Interest rate drops are happening because people don't have savings. People are not able to spend. People are taking out loans. Over the last 1 year, the number of times I've heard people take lines of credit, home equity lines of credit, borrowing on their credit cards just to make do and pay their mortgage payments. I am surprised that we didn't see more bankruptcies than we did. Now, bankruptcy rates have been ticking up, but just not enough, not as much as we thought we would see. And that's because people are over leveraged. People are borrowing from everywhere they can to make do with their payments. And Bank of Canada can see that, and they realize that if they don't cut the interest rates now, although I already think because we're starting to see so much pain in the economy, we are a little bit late. The impacts of the interest rate cuts will only be seen a few months down the line. So there's a little bit of pain that we have to still go through. But that is the reason why Bank of Canada is cutting interest rates. And that is why I think we do need that 0.5% cut to create a huge amount of relief. But at the same time, Bank of Canada is not going to come out and say it, even though the markets are pricing that in, because they don't want to create over-optimism. Now, after retail sales, what else tells us the picture of how people are doing? If we look at the GDP per capita for Alberta, as you can see, the GDP per capita has been on a constant decline since 2022. And GDP per capita is basically how well the economy is performing. And I rather look at GDP per capita versus just GDP, because this takes into account the population growth and ensures that are we still growing compared to all the infrastructure and expenditures that we have and need for the amount of people in the city. So GDP per capita is on the decline for Alberta. So that's a 2.7% decline year over year. And Alberta's GDP is still actually highest across all of Canada. So while we are on the decline, we are actually doing significantly better for the amount of population. Even though after all the population growth that we had last year, we are actually still doing a whole lot better. Ontario's GDP per capita is actually significantly lower than Alberta at just 53,000. So also when we look at GDP per capita year over year, you can see the percentage change. Every single province has seen a decline in GDP per capita except Nunavut. So everyone is suffering. So obviously lesser money being earned by every single province, lesser money going into the pockets of people, lesser ability to save, but higher expenses in the same amount of time. And that's why we've seen a decline in savings. After GDP per capita, what we want to look at is the Q2 key indicators forecast that Alberta released by the Calgary region. So right over here, you can see as far as interprovincial migration, the big thing that was driving Alberta and Calgary's growth is actually declining. So year over year, we've seen a 10% decline both from BC and Ontario. So Ontario contributes 44% of that interprovincial migration. BC contributes 27%, but overall we've seen a 10% decline. Instead, we've seen a 4.85% increase in the international net migration to Alberta. So that has still resulted in an overall population growth of 4.4% when we look at Q2 year over year. But the interprovincial migration story is slowly starting to die out as lesser and lesser people move to Alberta. And this goes together with my market reports and what I predicted almost, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, is the decision point is very different for people right now. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For example, 2 years ago, your decision point was, do I want to buy a semi-detached or detached property in Alberta, or do I want to buy an apartment in Ontario? But now your decision point really is, do I want to buy a townhouse in Alberta or an apartment, or do I want to buy an apartment in Ontario? So the price per dollar value, the cost to move, just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. While there is still a lot of affordability in certain sectors of the market, don't get me wrong, you can still potentially get a townhouse for sub 300. You can still find an apartment sub 300, but those are not exactly the types of product that people are looking for. And so it doesn't make sense for them to now move across provinces to Alberta, and we are seeing those declines happen. As far as housing starts is very important as an indicator. It's a forward-looking indicator, tells you how builders are looking at the economy and the potential impacts of the interest rates. So last year, we actually saw a decline in housing starts because money was extremely expensive. Builders didn't want to take the risk. The economy was uncertain. We were potentially going to go into a recession. But this year, we can see builders starting to take more and more risk because they're planning now for next year and the year after. So we've seen a 33% year-over-year increase in detached property construction. Semi-detached has gone up by 34%. Row townhouses has gone up by 15%, and apartments have gone up by 50% compared to last year. So there's obviously a lot of construction happening, and this is going to result in increased supply in the near future. So the next spring, we might see a lot more inventory. So the biggest problem and the challenge facing the Calgary market really is not just extremely high amounts of demand as the market would tell you, but it's actually a lack of inventory. As far as the demand goes, we are not significantly different than previous years. We are seeing more demand, but not to an extent that would have the impact on the prices that we saw in the last 2 years. All that impact has actually come from just a lack of inventory. So all this inventory now coming back on market, considering detached, 3,000 detached is about at least 3 months of inventory. Semi-detached, 1,000, that's 3 months of inventory. So all of this is like 3-4 months of inventory that will suddenly come on the market at some point. And as far as our rental market, we are actually seeing a 6% year over year increase in rental. But what I'm hearing is some people are now starting to see that stabilize. Rents are not going up as much as they did before. If you are renting in Calgary, definitely let me know in the comment section below. What are your rents? How much increase have you seen? Is this 6% even accurate? And are you still seeing rent increases? Because I'll be very curious to know what's like the real story on the ground, so that I can better help inform my buyers, but also calculate what's going to happen ahead and help inform more of the viewers right here. As we can see, the under construction in June, so rental constructions, 8,400 constructions are now underway, and ownership is 14,000. That is a lot. And as far as construction completion for year to date, so across the last 6 months, we've seen 4,800 increase, 4,800 new rentals come on market, and 6,700 home ownership type properties come on the market, which is pretty good. And I'm going to expect those numbers only to go up as we see more and more of those housing starts actually carry forward. Something to look at is the employment numbers reported here, and this will actually match exactly the research we did before. So as you can see, the employment shows that it's gone up quarter over quarter, even year over year. As far as our full-time employment also shows it's gone up. But if you look at the part-time employment, year over year, 20%. That is the highest among all of these numbers. And so obviously that's where a lot of the hiring is happening right now. And the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate is now 8%. That is pretty high for Alberta. And hopefully we are able to see a slowdown on that. So now to continue the story about the population growth, because that's a huge driver, not just of the economy, but also the real estate market. Something that we have seen happen is the government came out earlier this year and they pledged to drop the amount of student immigration happening. They're going to reduce the amount of study permits. But funny enough, if you actually compare the amount of study permits that we've issued this year compared to 2023, we have actually outpaced at record numbers. First 5 months of 2024, we've actually handed out 216,000 study permits. Same time last year, it was just 200,000. So we've actually handed out 16,000 more study permits after pledging that we're going to drop the amount of study permits that we are issuing out. And this will have a cascading effect down the line as it increases the amount of people now looking for rentals, increasing the amount of people who are going to become homeowners a few years down the line. So a lot of these international students go on to get work permits, permanent residency, and eventually become homeowners and put pressure on the housing market. And this can clearly be seen in Bank of Canada's latest report in terms of the immigrants to Canada and how long they take to become homeowners. So as you can see, within the first 3 years of coming to Canada, 40% of immigrants actually become homeowners. So these are not just long-term pressures on the market, but short-term pressures that are going to be seen within 2 to 3 years. And then it takes them potentially another 11 to 14 years for it to reach 60%. But 40% of those pressures are seen in the short term in the first 3 years itself. And with all of this being said, there's a lot of data that I collect on the Calgary real estate market on the back end. And we're going to take a look quickly at how apartments, townhouses, duplexes, and detached properties are performing, because there's been a huge reverse and shift in trends. So it's not just inflation and expenses or savings rates or uptick in unemployment. What impact does all of those things actually have on the housing market? Let's get some concrete data to try and understand where the Calgary real estate market's going. Obviously, a lot of this is also seasonal as we are in summer months and heading towards fall in a couple months. Right here for apartments, some of the things I track are the amount of price drops happening, because you want to calculate what the market sentiment is, how do buyers and sellers actually feel about the Calgary real estate market. So right over here, we can see the price drops. Over time, there were lesser price drops way in March and April, but the price drops have been significantly increasing as we headed into July. And that has caused not just days on market to start ticking back up. So this, we can see our tightest time was around between late April to maybe mid-May. But as soon as June came around, we've seen an uptick in days on market for apartments. And as far as selling above and below list price, right over here, you can see that while properties were selling mostly above list price around the May-June time, as far as July goes, we are now mostly selling below list price. And how does that affect the overall sold price? So start of the year, obviously, we saw a sharp increase. And starting from June to July, we've started seeing a decline. Now, each of these mini segments are $50,000. So this would be about a $5,000 drop that we've seen in the last 1 month. So our price is coming down. It would seem so. Of course, now this is going to dramatically change depending on which part of the market you are in, where you live, what type of apartment, whether it's a 1, 2, 3 bed, like different types of demand cycles are for different property types. But this gives you a good overall picture of where the Calgary real estate market's headed even before we get the market update. And that's what I think the next market update is going to reflect. As far as townhouses go, you can see the same trend. We are seeing more and more price drops happen on properties. And as far as people paying above and below list price, that was pretty crazy in April to May. A lot of people paying a lot above the list price. But that has seen a sharp decline as we head into July. People are not getting into bidding wars anymore or unconditional offers. People are paying a lot closer to list price, even though the list price is actually dropping because they're being listed and then staying on the market for a longer period of time. Not as much as apartments, but still staying longer than they used to. And obviously, when we now look at the sold price, we are seeing a drop in the sold price too. So you can see a slow decline right over here since June. Actually, it's since May. So it's been 2 months now since we've seen a slow decline, and it's an obvious trend. And I think that's going to continue going forward. We might see a balance out or a slight uptick, I think, in the fall months. But for now, this is what's happening. And this is why in a lot of groups we see people complaining about, is the Calgary real estate market slowing down, trying to predict what's happening. This data clearly paints a picture of what's happening. When we look at the semi-detached market, it's a very similar story. So price drops happening. Again, drop in the amount of people paying above or below list price, staying on market for longer, and sold price versus date is also dropping. And same thing for detached properties. Detached properties also has seen more and more price drops happen. And we're seeing properties sell closer to list price now as far as the trend line goes, and they're staying on market for longer. Those extremely tight conditions that we saw in May are no longer there. And as far as the sold price has also started weaning a bit down. Now each of these segments are 50,000, so it's a lot more of a drop on the detached properties than the other properties. This is closer to maybe a $25,000 drop. Now, of course, this data changes a lot depending on which part of the market you're looking at. So, for example, something that we can do here is look at different districts. So looking at apartments in city center, slightly different trends than you would see anywhere else. Their price drops were always there. It's nothing new, but they're seeing even more price drops now. And as far as selling above below list price, they used to before, then they were closer to list price and below. So there's different trends. There are certain parts of the market that are actually not seeing price drops just yet. You can see Northwest is starting to tick back, but there's just not enough data to conclude that. And as far as selling above and below list price, Northwest started dropping a lot earlier than other parts of the market. So this is extremely useful to understand depending on which communities you're looking to focus at. And I would love to have those discussions with you if you are curious to understand your communities and segments of the market even more. Definitely reach out. I love to have those conversations. This is a very data-oriented channel. I believe in the buyers and sellers being well informed and equipped to make those decisions and be proactive in the market to understand what's coming down the line versus being reactive. This gives you enough time to plan and prepare, and which is why I say if you're planning to buy or sell in the next 3 or even 6 months, reach out now, because we have to set you up with a customized game plan depending on what you are looking for. Everyone has different needs. You can't just come to the market a month before you're planning to buy. That's usually never a good, because then you are dependent on where the market's at and you're just reacting to what the market's doing. So definitely reach out. I would love to have those conversations. Once again, I know this is a longer video than I usually do, but hopefully gives you a good inside perspective on what's happening in the market. You find it extremely useful. And if you need any more data, if you have more questions, start those conversations in the chat. The last video I put out, there was a lot of good conversation in there. I respond to every single comment. I love those engagements with you, with my community. And I love to be challenged on the things that I believe in. And it just gets more conversations going and everyone benefits from it. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments on anything that I've mentioned, definitely call it out. I'm not right 100% of the time. These are just my opinions. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Till then, take care.